Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith, episode 125, 125. That's a number of clay court matches that Chris Everett won in a row. We'll have to have our fact checker check that. Delighted to have Andrew Rueb be our guest. He's the head men's tennis coach at Harvard. Delightful personality, amazing background, and it'll be fun to talk to him about his story from just like everyone, starting from the beginning, how he got connected with a great game of tennis, his day-to-day, and everything in between. I've done some homework, so I've got lots of questions to ask him. Let me get him on the phone. That might be my fastest telephone call on these podcasts so far. Improvement.
Hey, Steve.
Andrew Rueb, thank you so much for being our guest. Great to have you with us.
My pleasure.
We usually start with what type of baby food did you eat? No, I'm just teasing because we do have some lengthy conversations. But I've done some homework. Born in Washington, D.C., then you moved to Cleveland. Tell us your beginning days in tennis. How did you get the passion going to where you are today?
Great question. I'd love to talk about how I got started. I think I was born in D.C. We moved when I was 4, actually, to Westchester in New York, where I did a stint for about 6-7 years, where I really started to get into the game, and then we moved to Cleveland. So there was an intermediary step in there, but I was very lucky. I mean, my dad is from Oklahoma, and in college he went to Texas and near Austin, and he fell in love with the game, and he passed that on to us. I think my brother and I, started having a racket in our hand as soon as we were born, and I think he was always hoping to get some hitting partners and have somebody to hit with on the weekends. And that's sort of how it started. It was very organic. We went to the local park, and he sawed off a wooden racket for us, and we were, swinging away at a very, very early age, but it was always very fun and was really just recreational. And I guess, at those clinics, one of the pros said, "Oh, these kids are pretty good. You should, sort of move them up the food chain and pass this on." We were at a club there in Bronxville that had a wonderful coach who was a former Brazilian Davis Cup player named Jamie Di Carvalho, who was just the perfect introductory coach for us. He was so supportive and knowledgeable and gave us some good foundation. So, we're always very blessed if we can get some good help early on. And I've been really lucky to have been passed on to some wonderful coaches that made a huge impact. So I really started there, and it was, in that fashion. And then I moved to Cleveland at about 10 or 11, and also was lucky to be connected with Dr. Arun Jetli. Arun was my coach all through, juniors and in college, and even on the pro tour. And, just had an immense impact on my life. As you know, those relationships with the coaches is just, especially your junior coach is so deep and important and, vital. And so Arun was a disciple of Harry Hopman and really gave me, sort of extended the knowledge I already had on the game and helped me, grow as I became a top junior player and then a college player and beyond. I just think, we had an amazing sort of dynamic setup around there, because there was, in addition to some older mentors of my, junior players that were 3-4 years older than I was that were really helped pull me along and mentor me. I think that was crucial. You sort of have to have a critical mass of competitive, nutrients around you to grow into a healthy player. And we were really lucky that way. And I felt like I could get everything I needed in Cleveland. So that was huge. There was also a whole layer of college, post-college players, former college players in the area that also helped me. And when I sort of ran out of some junior competition, they were there for me. So, that's a little bit of the journey. I from my junior career. What else might be interesting?
Well, the Cleveland Racket Club, that facility, I was fortunate. Mark Leisman, who was one of those older college players, he played at Northwestern. I'm sure you knocked a lot of balls around with him and some of his contemporaries. Tell us a little bit about that facility. I was just there in the wintertime, but you have clay, and they did a number of things for doubles for years in the summer, right?
Yeah, no, we were just, again, very fortunate. It attracts all the best players around there. And so there was a whole slew of former college players that like Mark, that really helped me. There was Kevin Shaw, who formerly played at Harvard. There was Tom Lucci, who is a spectacular age group player all the way up probably through the 70s. He was, always pushing me, getting me, to improve my game. And it wouldn't have been possible without that. Tom Colton, somebody who was also, star player, still playing age group tournaments and ITFs all across the world. He was a big influence on me as well. So, that it was more like basically like a European club, where you could go and play and there's top level competition there. It's not like a country club where there's the tennis is very recreational. Tennis comes first. And so it was, I probably could, I could ride my bike there in 5 minutes from my house. So it was just huge to have that sort of access and competition. And certainly for me, learning doubles, there's nothing more important than playing with older men. As I was, starting at probably 12 and 13, I was playing in their sort of adult leagues, and that was just, huge. I mean, there's no way to, accelerate your growth than playing with adults and playing in some of those men's leagues. So it was a perfect setup.
When I was there, it was wintertime, so I didn't see the outdoor courts, but you had the best of playing on hard court in the winter and clay in the summer, right?
Yeah, I probably did quite a bit of that. So that's sort of like almost like a Scandinavian background where they play on faster indoor courts and then play on some clay in the summer, and I definitely benefited from that.
And what about your brother? How many years between you? It certainly helps to have a built-in practice partner.
Yeah, my brother's 3 years younger than I am, and I have a sister as well who fizzled out from tennis early on. But this was a tennis family, and my brother went on to be captain of the Dartmouth tennis team, and he was also just a great player. Big forehand, big Western grip, flat forehand that he could rocket through the court. I probably could have used his forehand at some points, but he was a strong player, and we were all really passionate about the game, and we had a really, many ways just really idyllic set up. And we with Arun and the academy, we had this, there was just dozens and dozens of players going on to play in college, be captains of teams, and it was you just couldn't wait to get out to the courts. And certainly, doing all the school that we did, we practiced in the morning before school. A lot of times Arun would set up clinics, and, we'd be there at, 5:30 in the morning, and then maybe come back and hit again later in the afternoon. And then you're managing your schoolwork. So it was busy and we worked hard, but it never felt like a sacrifice because, it was fun. And I think that was a key driver.
When you played, Andrew, did you play at the era when high school tennis was still important? Did you play high school tennis?
Well, I would say, it's not like it is now where it's, sort of just, fallen to new lows, but we did. We were also blessed that we had this very famous high school tennis team at University School in Cleveland, which we traveled all over the country to play the best teams. Our coach was Jeff Morton, who, he's just he was just a really forward-thinking guy. He's been actually an official and officiated matches for years on the pro tour. And he just was sort of savvy. He was the head of the upper school at University School. And we traveled to Michigan to play Liggett and Cranbrook. We went, down to play schools in Columbus, Ohio. We went out to the East Coast to play in Virginia. We played the JV teams at, Annapolis against the Naval Academy in Princeton. And we played Lawrenceville. And so it was sort of like an all-star team. It's actually, frankly, the best team probably I've ever been on was my high school tennis team. We had, at one point, our number 6 player ended up being the number one player at Michigan. So, I mean, it was like, he was young at the time as a freshman, but we had a stacked team, and we would just literally try to find the best teams in the country, and then he'd probably call them up and try to schedule a match. And so that was very unique, and it just doesn't really exist anymore.
No, that sounds so unusual. That's fantastic. University Liggett in Grosse Pointe. Age-wise, you're younger than Kriegstein? Aaron Kriegstein?
Yeah, we played his. You're right, and he was like, where is he? And he's down in Florida, and he probably was already at that point, winning ATP events. But he's probably, I think, 3 years older than I am, 3, 4. But of course, his legacy. I mean, Malavia Washington was 3 years older or so than me. Todd Martin. So they were all in our what's now called the Midwest section. Originally, it was called the Western section, which seems a misnomer given that we're Ohio, Michigan, and some of those, Chicago. So, but yeah, that was sort of the era. I guess Jim Courier and all those guys. I mean, this was the heyday for American tennis, and they were just churning out one top 10 player after the next.
Let me ask you this question. And I remember when the Midwest sectionals was called Westerns, and the discussion was, why do so many really good players come out of the Midwest? Was it the appreciation of indoor court time, the respect of, or the understanding of Big Ten sports, the appreciation of indoor court time? Why do you think that, all these small cities, Dayton, Toledo, there's Milwaukee, and actually people have done some work and said that there were more players coming out of the Midwest before the advent, before the heyday, the start of the tennis academy. What are your thoughts on tennis in the Midwest then versus now?
Well, I mean, this is a great question. I mean, there was certainly a critical mass. I mean, it works like this for countries too, right? You get a critical mass of good players, and then it sort of mentors and pulls along other players from those academies. And there were lots of very good coaches. I mean, certainly Brian Smith's still there, when in Carmel or whatever, and his dad was a great coach, and we had Arun's Academy in Cleveland. There was great coaches in Columbus, up in Michigan and Chicago certainly. So there was these great little mini academies essentially. Obviously now everything's become consolidated. So everybody's migrating to Florida and California, and it's an exodus, and so. Yeah, it's hard to get a critical mass now. It's hard to get court time. We're finding more and more kids are trying to travel and play during the school year, and sort of land-based schools, physical schools are not as willing to allow kids to play these sorts of tournaments that are sort of required, or they think they're required to sort of get to the next level. And so I think you see a hollowing out of the talent, and a sort of a migration to Florida, which it's concentrating now. That's the sort of competitive, rich environment, and I think that's got to have something to do with it. I haven't been with my finger on the pulse of what's happening in the Midwest tennis these days, but that's kind of maybe seeing some larger trends that I could put my finger on.
No, I think a lot of times people are going nowhere fast. It's running in circles. Like who goes further, who wins the race, the rabbit or the turtle. I know right now there's been a lot of players visiting that are here to play the Orange Bowl qualies. Yeah. They play one match, and sometimes it's one and done. And if they had stayed local, and if they say even just the indoor nationals, you end up playing more matches.
Well, that's true. I mean, but you can always, how you put your schedule together, you have options, and you can play different types of local money tournaments or UTR tournaments, or I mean, there are different ways to stitch it together, and yeah, I mean, that's a whole larger debate on ITF and traveling to get points, and so there are, you got to sort of figure out your level, I think, certainly, and try to make it targeted and to what you and your coach have a plan for. I
know your predecessor at Harvard, Dave Fish, he talks about tennis in St. Louis. I love the story of Bill Price, where he would, that was back when many coaches just worked, it was just a hobby. And he would go to the Little League baseball games. It wasn't really fair for girls at that time. if you played sports, if you loved sports as a girl, you call it tomboy. But what he did with many players is he'd pick out whoever the shortstop was or someone who's really talented, and he'd meet with the parents and say, well, if you buy a ping pong table and you play ping pong with these grips, and then you come and you watch me teach on the weekends, then a year later I'll teach you for free. And probably the most famous story is that of Chuck McKinley, who won Wimbledon. Mm-hmm. But that, St. Louis, I do think that players create players. So like what you're talking about with your high school setting, you look to your left, you look to your right, it's almost osmosis.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Give me some more names. I mean, that St. Louis tennis scene. I mean, that was sort of fun. I mean, obviously there's Chuck and also Bobby McKinley and Jimmy Connors came out of St. Louis, and I think Arthur Ashe moved to St. Louis, as I remember.
That's right. Yeah, the gentleman who ran the tournament in Miami for a long time, Buck Holtz. There's a famous story about. Actually, I want to go back, and you mentioned Brian Smith. I'll tell a quick story about Brian Smith, but. Jimmy Connors got beat by Bobby McKinley. Bobby just hit drop shots and lobs, and Steve Denton tells a story. That's where Jimmy came up with the sky hook. But Gloria went up to Bobby McKinley, and she used to, like Jimmy did, take the index finger and just point, and she said, "You will never beat my son that way again." So they went home and went to practice. But you mentioned Brian Smith in Indianapolis, Carmel. It just worked out that one of my students was being recruited by Jeremy Wertzman. Another student was playing a junior tournament that was in that area. So I like to visit tennis school, or academy. So we went by Brian's place, and there was this big the Lincolns from it was like a 1980 Lincoln automobile. It was like as big as a boat, a yacht, and these two tennis players were pushing it, and this nice lady came by and said, "I have AAA, I could help you out." And one of the guys looked up who was pushing. He said, "This is fitness." And they were pushing that. I've been told many things. At one time, those guys practiced in the morning in an old Home Depot. Hungry dog eats best. But I've done some homework. So you've recruited by UCLA and other top schools. How'd you choose Harvard?
Well, actually, I had four schools that I was a good student and a good player, and sort of looking to find a marriage of both, and went on 4 recruiting trips and just fell in love with Harvard. Honestly, I'm Paul Torricelli was the coach at Northwestern, and we're still friends to this day. I mean, they had Todd Martin recently on the team. They had Steve Hurtowitz. They had great teams there, and that was a strong interest of mine. I looked at Notre Dame with Bobby Bayless, the famous coach up in there, came from the Naval Academy, and that was a great option. And at the time, I also looked at UCLA, went out west to take a look, what was happening out there too, and just sort of seeing what was the feel. And honestly, for me, it was the Harvard team was very strong, and they're a top 15 program, and we had 3 All-Americans on the team my freshman year. And so I knew that the level would be high enough that I could continue to improve and keep my dreams of playing pro alive. But it was also the school and the opportunity to be surrounded by other people that had passion and really had, were willing to sacrifice for a journey, something that they were engaged in. I felt it really energized me and kind of spoke to, what I was interested in, my background, and it was a great fit. I mean, really, it was one of those things you just, after 5 minutes, you're like, yeah, this is my home. So that's kind of how I picked it. I love Dave. Dave was also part of that decision to come to Harvard. He's just he was just obviously as a mentor to me, and we've had just an extremely long friendship because I played for him and then worked with him. But at the time when I was looking at schools, Dave was a real student of the game. He's a learner. He really sort of helped us to sort of gain a mastery over the game and had I think a really good feel for how to build the skills that could help you on the next level at the pro tour. And we had an assistant coach, Greg Russell, from the famous Russell Jamaican tennis family. Greg was, just an awesome person and a great coach. And mentor to me as well. And so that was a perfect 1-2 combination, I would think. And then then to have the school behind you and, the great opportunity that Harvard it was just kind of a no-brainer. But, yeah, I mean, we could certainly talk about Dave for a long time as somebody who, you've gotten to know through the years and work with a lot too.
No, I have down. He was a coach for 42 years at Harvard, but I also know he went to Exeter, so you can add another. I think he was there 3 years. That's what an amazing place Exeter is. I met Dave Fish. You guys with good hair, you look so much younger than you are, both you and Dave Fish. But he came out to the Vic Braden Tennis College. I'm going to guess it was Don Unger?
Yeah, Don Usher, yep.
And yeah, so I was there. They met with Vic in the afternoon, but I was their go-to guy during the morning. And then I was there for 5 years at Harvard. I used to tease people and say I spoke during commencement because I was there to help the tennis camp staff.
Right.
But yeah, I've got my notes here that Dave Fish, there's like a short clip on YouTube where you're put in the Hall of Fame. Andrew Rueb, driven to hang in with the best players in the country, had guts and class, great mix. He's a natural-born teacher, wonderfully enthusiastic. But before Dave Fish, and we can talk more about Dave, but Jack Barnaby, I remember reading his books and using his books, training tennis teachers. And I was fortunate enough to listen to him lecture, and I read this from one of your articles where it's a great quote from Barnaby. Coaching junior tennis players is putting old heads on young shoulders. Did you get a chance to spend a lot of time with Jack Barnaby?
I met him briefly once and had spoken to his wife, but I did not know Jack. And he had sort of, I think, retired, many, many years ago. And I did not get to know him, but I knew him through the stories from Dave. And Dave would give us these, incredible stories. I guess, Jack Barnaby was pretty loquacious and he was, obviously like to talk and tell stories. And so Dave he has a great memory, would pass along these tales. And, so that sort of, there's a institutional knowledge of the living history of Harvard tennis, knowing that, I think since 1930, I'm the fourth coach. And so, because Jack Barnaby taught for, probably 40 years as well. And Dave taught for 42 years. And so, that there is they've left their imprint all over our program, which is pretty cool. And that they were both leaders, in tennis. I mean, Jack, was writing books and coaching coaches, and Dave did the same thing as mentor to so many people in the tennis industry and helping to start UTR and, has a huge legacy in the game. And it's pretty cool to follow in their footsteps. I mean, that's not something, it's not a, like whatever, following, Saban in Alabama. It's not a great, never want to be following them, but, we're giving our best and enjoying that and try to carry on that tradition. I mean, Harvard tennis it's got an amazing tradition helping to start the Davis Cup. The first Davis Cup team was basically all Harvard players. The Harvard Lawn Tennis Association was founded a year before the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association. And then, they sort of helped get this started. So there is a great history in the game here. And, we're certainly proud of it.
Jack Barnaby, before Bill Tim, he was considered the voice of the USPTA. So I know he, outside of Harvard, beyond Harvard, he's definitely contributed to tennis nationwide. I know you're a very humble guy, but let me pump your tires here a little bit. He had a standout career at Harvard. First team All-Ivy, 93-95. First team All-Ivy, singles and doubles, 93-95. 3 Ivy League championships. Senior Player of the Year, team captain. Who were some of your teammates when you were at Harvard?
Yeah, we had, my first year, we had a star-studded cast of seniors, this amazing senior class. There was Albert Chang, who got to around 140 ATP, played Davis Cup for Canada. He got to the semifinals of a challenger before his senior year. I mean, he was a hell of a player. Mike Zimmerman, who was multiple-time All-American, one of the smartest players probably ever in Harvard tennis. Just was a dogged competitor. And I was just fell into these circumstances where I was mentored by really good players ahead of me, which you have to have, right? And so that was really a blessing. We had Mike Sheehan on the team, also an All-American. We had Derek Brown on the team, who these were all from the same class, and it was just like a superstar class. And then as I got older, and sort of when they left, I sort of took up the mantle and, moved up towards the top of the lineup and had all sorts of great people join our team, from Tom Blake. So James's older brother, Tommy, was on our team, and with his amazing serve and great game and great personality. We had, Todd Maringoff, who, probably got the 500 ATP and was a great player, Mitty Arnold. The list goes on. Phil Sang from SoCal was on our team. He was part of the Junior Davis Cup team. He was probably like a laser backhand. So we had a really good team. We competed like we do now with all the best teams in the country. And it's always sort of fun when they sort of have this sort of image of what Harvard teams are going to be like. And we were, pretty tough crew, and it was fun.
As a freshman, were you fortunate enough to be a regular in the lineup?
I know. I played 6 my first year, and which is a big deal because you want to get that experience that first year, and was lucky enough to do that. And I also played doubles. I played number 2 doubles. My double skills were probably ahead of my single skills, and we did very well with the NCAAs in doubles with my partner Albert Chang, and we were one of the better teams in the country. So it was, that was a great way to start and build confidence. And then, my sophomore year, they graduated and I sort of moved up to the top and, had a different role, when you're near the top of the lineup. So that was, my trajectory in college, which was fun. And my junior year, I got an injury with my shoulder and my knee. And so I was out for a whole year, and that really slowed my progress, I would say. My sophomore year, I played the NCAA tournament, won in my first round against the top player from Pepperdine, and then lost to Chris Woodruff, who beat me in straights and ended up winning the tournament and did pretty well. Yeah. And so my junior year was sort of a wash. And my senior year, honestly, I was just getting back my level. I felt like as soon as I graduated, I had a year of tennis underneath me. I was playing much better, but, so it was a little interruption in my progression there, but I loved it.
Yeah, Chris Whitford, he did really well on the tour. Coaches Tennessee now. How about John Doran from Ireland? Was he a teammate, or is he a little bit after you?
No, John's younger than I am, and John, I just saw John when I was at Wimbledon. We stayed at his house there in Wimbledon Village, and it was a great Irish Davis Cupper and big game, big serve, but we didn't overlap. There was a small group of people that came after me. He was on the team when James Blake was on the team, and James came after, my time there. But we, obviously seen him because he'd come to some of the matches rooting on Tommy. So, there's been a lot of great players, in our history. We saw John Chu in 2005 get to the semifinals of singles and doubles at the NCAA tournament. Lost to Isner in the doubles, and then lost in 3 sets to Benedict Dorsch. That was when they were playing in College Station there at Texas A&M. So, he was just another great Harvard tennis player. He was just inducted into the Harvard Athletics Hall of Fame, a couple months ago.
I had a chance to work a little bit with John Doran, and he talked about James Blake. Actually, Raven Clausen, one of our students, played some doubles with Thomas Blake. Why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us what comes to your mind first if you had to tell a James Blake story?
Well, I mean, I would say that because I didn't play with James, that we had seen him at the time, and he was, when I saw him when he was still in high school. I mean, he was small, he was thin, he had the one-handed backhand, and you sort of said, I don't know, how who knows how good he could be. I would say we did practice together a few times, either when I was coming off of the tour or whatever. But his drive and his speed, his commitment to his game. He has an amazing coach, Brian Barker, who really just did a great job of developing a lot of confidence for James and trusting his identity as a player, which was, a little more of a risk taker. It really paid off for James. But we, at the time, it was Tommy had a nickname. It was Tommy Gun, and James we sort of teased him. We called him squirt guns at the time because he was so small. That was probably not, he probably did not enjoy that, considering what his accomplishments are. But he's certainly a model teammate, gets the team aspect and loved it, and built a wonderful community at Harvard that he carried with him on tour. He's spoken quite eloquently about how he built a network of friends and community at Harvard that then supported him on his tour career, because it's a lonely path, and he really leaned on that group. And he, it was just amazing. We're all so proud of what kind of person he is, what an ambassador he is, what a spokesperson he is, and how good he was. Jeepers. He's just the speed, the forehand, just electric to watch. And we always, people say, well, can I come to Harvard and get good? I said, well, I don't know. You can get to 4 in the world. We haven't proven you can get in the top 3 yet, but I think you could do okay, and they just, his coach, Brian, just had just really a magic touch and understood that, it's a process you develop. And then when you're ready for the next level, you're ready. And, he was one of the top 1 or 2 juniors. I think he lost in the finals at Kalamazoo in the 18s and as a junior. And then in college, he won like 3 of the 4 kind of Grand Slams of college tennis. He lost in the finals of the NCAA tournament. So he actually had a little bit of disappointment there, that kept motivating him. And then, of course, he just took off and he got bigger and he could, got able to hit over those one-handers. And, he was really true to his game. He attacked second serves. He was a little more of a gambler in that sense, and he wasn't there to just have long rallies. He didn't give people a lot of tempo and a lot of, feel so that he could keep them disrupted. And, you never knew what was coming with that forehand of his. That was just, it was awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if I read this in James Blake's autobiography. Maybe Dave Fish told me, because I love to ask coaches about other coaches. So from a learning standpoint, I've never met Brian Barker, but Dave Fish certainly told me, and so have others, so many great things about him. But I'll come back to a Brian Barker story. But here's something that comes to mind with James Blake. So I'm driving a minivan. We got 2 minivans. I'm driving one, and Colin Lee from England, who taught tennis forever in Connecticut, taught at the same club as James's mother. And this is back when kids all were wearing, they had a Walkman. I guess that's what it was called. And,
right.
So Colin Lee's telling all these stories about the Blake brothers growing up. And I look in my rear view mirror and nobody's listening. I'm just going, and he's got a couple years older than I am and all this experience. But and I'm always, again, telling the kids, read autobiographies.
Right.
Get a library card. But Brian Barker, and James says in his book that he was a brat and wasn't listening to anybody. And when he was like 13 years old, and Wielander happened to be right there, Mads Wielander, and Brian Barker became good friends with him. And the deal was if James really behaved himself Monday through Saturday, that he'd get to hit with a former number 1 player in the world. And he said that really, really helped him out. Yeah.
And Brian is a coach of the whole person. I think that's, Brian, he's mentored a lot of people in tennis, and I think his story is not as well told as it should be, frankly. There's a whole group of us as coaches that lean on Brian and call him up and ask him for advice, even today. I think he just understands the personal psychology of young people and how to connect with them and how to frame things in a way that's non-threatening and empowering for young people. And I think he just really finds a way to trust them and then, but he holds people accountable too. And that's a tough thing to do without coming off as, like a taskmaster. And so he's really like a tennis coach whisperer, and I just think, more coaches should learn from Brian about how to do it. I certainly think today even more so. Maybe that's another podcast guest for you there.
One thing with Brian, I was told that he would never tell someone, "Oh, you can't beat this player because they're too steady." I really don't like when I hear it all the time. "Oh, you're playing a pusher." I'll beat them at their own game. They're not a pusher; they're a defensive specialist. But he would never he would never tell his player that, "Oh, well, you're not steady enough. You have to play, have to play this way because they're a better pusher than you are. Just, I tease people. They ask me what I do. I say I fight ignorance every day. But I was told
Right.
that, but he would never tell someone, this person is better at you than that. And he just was very, very insightful in how he would deal with the tennis mind.
Yeah, language is really important as coaches, as you know, and how you want to frame things is vital. I think he also knows how to take pressure off young people who keep a ton of pressure on themselves these days, and how to, help them have a space to play free and to go after their game, which I think is also hard. What if I lose? These sort of thoughts we all have, and you have to sort of work your way out of. And he's really good at giving people a pathway to play with a little more freedom. And I think that's what good coaches do.
Andrew, let's move on to, I read where you called it your next degree, where you were on the tour for 4 years. Why don't you expound upon that a little bit?
Well, again, I graduated and desperately wanted to play pro tennis. I, never left the country. When I graduated Harvard, I only played domestically and sort of used all our vacation and summer times to just play and compete. And I was just raring to go. So for me, it was like great. And then harkening back to my Cleveland Racket Club group, they had a bunch of the members there helped sponsor me and get me started and gave me some seed money to get my, tennis dream started. And it was, I'm forever grateful. And you need that kind of support, to have a chance to do it. And I traveled all over and, couldn't get enough of it. So it was kind of like a chance to travel, to play, compete. And I took it very seriously. I didn't have the funds to have a coach traveling with me much of the time. And so you sort of, kind of doing it yourself. It was certainly a journeyman existence. And I played originally some of the first satellites because it was still satellites going on when you have to play 3 weeks and then the fourth, the Masters, to get your points, and then started transitioning to some futures, and then eventually, some challengers, a few ATP events. But I don't know. For me, it was just, just an eye opener to play all over Africa, to play in Europe, and to play in Asia, and all of it was just like a higher degree. It really was. How you learn the game, you just have to commit yourself 24/7 to that tennis, and that's how you get better. And it's a pressure cooker for sure, but it's also, the improvement I saw over a couple of years was really pretty dramatic, because I could really just completely focus on my tennis, and just you learn from your fellow competitors. There's a lot of collegiality and camaraderie there. Because you're sort of all in it together when you're there for 4 weeks in the Philippines or playing tournaments, and we played a couple satellites in satellite in South Africa. Just had just really lifelong memories from those sorts of times. And as a player, I was progressing. I had a serve and volley game. I serve and volley in the first and second serve. I chip charged, and it was as things were moving out of that phase. I played with a wood racket until I was about 10. So I do have a connection with that era. And frankly, my game, as Michael Joyce once said, I was playing doubles with him at a tournament, and he turned to me and said, Rueb, you would have been great in the wood racket era. And as soon as he said that, it was sort of a put down, but he was actually right. My game was probably, I would have been a better player, singles player for sure, in the wood racket era, given my grips and the way I approached the game. Certainly didn't have a big enough serve like a Taylor Dent to make a serve and volley game work at the top level. I felt like my volleys were amongst the best. Certainly, I thought, and could compare favorably with most of the guys on tour. I was really confident in my volleys, but I didn't have the athleticism of a Pat Rafter. So, that was sort of some of the limitations I think I had, and I made the most of what I did. And again, it was still then. It was that time serve and volley tennis was still slowly dying out. Obviously the courts and the strings and all of that have really hampered it. Although certainly the importance of the volley hasn't gone away, but that style it's harder to pull off. then I was, journeyman through the ranks and got a chance to play Wimbledon in 1997 in doubles. We qualified with, I played with Robbie Koenig, the announcer, TV announcer, has been doing it for a long time now, mostly in Europe. But Robbie and I won 3 qualifying matches at Roehampton to get into the main draw, and then played. I think it was one of the seeds was Trevor Croneman and David McPherson, who both stars of the game, and we lost in the first round. But certainly one of my whenever I tell people about my experiences, I would say I was a good minor league player who got a cup of coffee in the major leagues at a few events, and loved getting a chance to sort of get a window into what that looked like, because it was very different than the playing we were playing in a small town in the south of France, compared to playing at Wimbledon, for sure.
A couple of weeks ago, we had on Julian Krinsky, who also played Wimbledon, and I love Bud Collins. Bud Collins said there's 2 types of tennis players: those who play Wimbledon and those who don't. But you certainly met Bud Collins over the years, the colorful commentator, the late great Bud Collins. Tell us about Bud Collins.
Well, actually, Bud's from Boston, or not originally from Boston.
He's actually from Cleveland originally. But he moved to Boston as a young writer and fell in love with it.
Yeah, I think he went to Baldwin Wallace College, which is very near where I lived in Cleveland, and then came to Boston, and so he's sort of an institution, certainly, and in the Boston tennis community, New England tennis community, or around the globe too. He was beloved. He interviewed me my senior year of college. He came to watch one of the matches at Harvard and wrote a piece about me in the Boston Globe, and made some passing reference to it was nice to see a chipped forehand, because I would, on the second serve, I often just stuck with my continental grip and chipped both the forehand and backhand and came in, and he thought that was a nice thing of the past, but it was that was one of the things he highlighted in that article. And so he interviewed me then, and then when I played Wimbledon in '97, it was one of those weird years where it rained the entire week and of the main draw, and we didn't actually play. But Robbie and I played our first match on the middle Sunday in 1997, which was one of the few times they ever played on the middle Sunday until they made that change this past year. Only because it rained, and so there's kind of a washout. And Bud was looking for articles to write. I'd seen him. I said hello, and on one of those days where there was nothing to write about, he pulled me into the Wimbledon press office and interviewed me, and it, sort of talked about some of my experiences in the minor leagues and sort of all the little tricks of the trade to save money on a meal or whatever. I guess a joke, but somebody tipped me off that you could enter Shakespeare's house in Stratford upon Avon. If you enter the museum and from the exit, there's nobody there watching the door, and you could get in for free. So we had little stories and vignettes from my travels, and he documented that and put a great article together in the Globe years ago. I was talking about teasing me about my last name Rueb, which something about a Rueb at Wimbledon, playing with the sort of other meaning of Rube as sort of a country person. So yeah, and then to stay in Boston and to get to know his wife Anita a little bit, and also he was a staple at Longwood at the cricket club, playing in bare feet on grass, and he was just a really good storyteller. He loved finding and highlighting people and telling their stories. I think it was that human element of him that was really compelling. I don't think he was an X's and O's guy, but in sort of the tennis, world, but he knew people and knew stories, and he was there to help them tell their story on a bigger stage. And we, was really loved getting to know Bud.
Yeah, I can remember when Bud did TV, not just the color commentary, but where he was actually in the booth with Donald Dell, going back in the 70s. At one point, every Monday night there was a final on TV during the summer. It was fantastic. College tennis players have so much support. What was it like? I mean, it's great that you had some people from the Cleveland Racket Club help you with financial support, but when you're out there on your own, you got to get visas to go from one country to the next. And tell us a little bit about that. It's much more difficult
Well,
to be a touring pro than how your players are catered to in college. Although I know at Harvard, under Dave Fish, you had to string your own rackets.
well, we did. I did when I was in college. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you quickly learn that you have to be, your own best advocate, and you have to take charge of the learning process, and you have to become, take ownership of it and accountability. So, I think good programs do that. I think you want to put the learning and the emphasis back on the students. We certainly try to do that in our program. Because when you do, you're right, exactly right. When you step out on tour, you're unless you have the backing of your federation, you have lots of support or financial wherewithal to get that team around you. You have to sort of work to create it, whether that's, videotaping your matches and having, your coaches back home watch it, which people are doing now, or having the people that you're traveling with, feed off, exchange feeding drills. It's a challenge, certainly, because there's financial stresses, and it's also hard if you go out and play a challenger and you lose first round, and you've got 6 days to sort of sit around. That empty space is something that I think the players that keep moving up the levels get good at managing their time and making use of it. I think it can be really discouraging when your whole identity is with your tennis and you're not winning. You could go, on the top level, you could lose 6 first rounds in a row, and that could be, you could still have a really good year if you win a couple of, go further in a couple of events, and you have to sort of steel yourself to that sort of, feedback. Because in college or in juniors, you're winning, what was that they say, like, 80-90% of your matches, the top juniors, and at college you're winning, 70%. I mean, these are depending on the person, but you're not winning as much. And then on the pro tour, you're winning even less. And how do you keep yourself going and keep steady, and sort of, when the peaks come up and you're doing really well, it's sort of just, stay level. And when you go have a trough, not going too deep in there. I mean, I think that's probably the toughest part of managing this experience, I think. And how do you put a group of people around you so that you have some community, so you're not out there by yourself if you don't have the funds to travel with you. So, that's still the challenge. And I love that learning experience, because you have to, you can't, whatever, you got to try to solve those problems, and you're, traveling in Japan and you can't read the subway signs, and how do you get a meal and you can't read the menu? And, those are great experiences for people to grow up. I think, those are life lessons that, also, I think, indirectly help your tennis, because you just sort of, you mature.
I've heard this said about we Americans that some of us think if we've been to Europe one time, we're well traveled.
Right.
So you're 4 years on the tour. You went back to Harvard, got a master's in religion and literature, correct?
Yes.
But before you returned, was it just financial attrition? Why did you stop? Why did you not keep going? I love how you hung in there until you played Wimbledon. I
actually played Wimbledon sort of in the middle of my career, and then I stopped in 99. A couple years later, I wasn't progressing the same way. I stalled in singles around 370 or something ATP, or somewhere top 400, and I really wasn't. There was not a lot of path forward for me there. I did very well in doubles, and I was. I don't know. I think there were some choices there that I made. I didn't solely focus on doubles. Of course, that means you're playing different tournaments. I could play higher level, but I couldn't play my singles. And I think there was some choices I made that after a couple of years, if you're not progressing up the levels and really getting a chance to play at the challengers and then the ATP events more regularly, I mean, it's hard to keep it going financially, and then just, it's not as rewarding if you're not improving and not sort of seeing that. I mean, certainly in doubles, there could have been a pathway, maybe, if I sort of give some advice to young people, if I was giving advice to myself now, I probably would have early on focused on doubles. I think I played, 3 satellites right out of the gate, and I won 10 of the 12 tournaments. I mean, and I was really confident in my doubles, but I always thought, you try to do both. And that might have been, if I, look back, it might be something I would have probably done a little bit differently. But, by 4 years out there, and, you can only, if you're not playing those bigger tournaments and getting that, it's hard to keep going. I think it wears you down. And I had other things and other interests that I was excited about. I mean, I think tennis life is great and the travel is wonderful, but it's pretty, you're pretty focused on yourself, and there is, you lack some rewards there when and I think there's also some pitfalls in just focusing on yourself that I think I was ready for, whether it was teaching or giving back or finding a ways to work with others in a community setting. I think was probably a better fit for me too personally. I like being around people, and that's sort of a natural to me. So I think that was another piece of that the sort of the timer, started to ring on my career.
So tell us about your third degree, your first degree at Harvard, then 4 years on the tour. Talk a little bit about master's in religion and literature.
That's funny. Well, funny. It's actually, I think it's in Moby Dick where Melville says that he talks about his time on the whale ship as his Harvard and his Yale. So I actually love that comment, like, learning by being out there in the world. And, so anyway, that's where my second degree came from. But, then I went back to grad school where I was, I thought I might be a teacher, and I definitely wanted to get away from tennis for a few years. And I did a master's degree, and I was really interested in literature and the ways that stories and tell us a lot about a culture and how you can pass on your values and ethics and morals, and the way that, it gives us a chance to, excite our sort of moral imagination. And so I was interested in that and exploring different religions as well. So it was a really broad program at Harvard Divinity School that allowed me to really sample a whole host of different ideas and faith systems. And my degree was not a clerical degree. I wasn't going to go into ministry. It was more an educational degree, although, a few of the students were in that pathway. So, it was a sort of exploratory time. And I really, it was grateful for that, and was thinking about what it'd be like to be in the classroom. And that's when Dave sort of knocked on the door and said his, assistant was leaving, and wondering if I wanted to get into this and have that opening. And that was, sort of a turning point for me, but one that I was very glad with my decision to join Dave and sort of leave my graduate studies behind and, get into a different kind of classroom.
Because you were working on your PhD even after that, right?
Yeah. So I went to BU getting a PhD in religion and literature, and Dave, I'd volunteered for Dave before as well, and I've done a little bit of teaching, and so I sort of kept the irons in the fire there with Dave and coaching. But so that then the assistant job opened up, which was paid, and I jumped at the chance, and that sort of started my career. 16, 17 years ago, college coaching.
Before we get into college coaching, I read where you were instrumental in a program called Back to School, where the Harvard coaches go to class with their players. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, it was one of those things where, I think it was even a conversation with Dave about, sometimes how as college coaches we get busy, we're recruiting, we're focused on our players, and we're not always connected with the academic life cycle of students or connected with their intellectual life. And we started this program where coaches go with students to class, and we do it for like a couple weeks in the winter when it's a little gloomy out a little bit in February, and so it's a kind of a fun exercise that we do. And it's one to say, like, the students that, hey, coaches are involved too. And it's also to build that relationship between the athletics and academic side of Harvard. It's been really successful and really fun, and it's still, still going. And there were some years off for COVID, but it's something that, we're pretty proud of here at Harvard, because, you want to make sure that you're, as coaches, we're still learners too. And it's not, classroom learning it can be exciting, and it's certainly, a nice break from our coaching routine too. So that's kind of how it started, and it's still going now.
Let me throw a little curveball at you before we start talking about the team, being the assistant coach and now the head coach. I'm sure that you'll have no problem with this, but a hockey question. I tease people I know obviously some of the students I've worked with have gone to Harvard. And I said, did you go to the hockey games? And they said, no. I said, well, then your education wasn't worth anything. But just teasing. But the Moore brothers from Toronto, Mark, Steve, and Dominic, they all played some tennis. You must know. Did you overlap with any of those guys?
I've become very close friends with Dom Moore, who lives in Boston now, and we've hit many, many times. And certainly his brother Steve, those are the ones I know the best. As I heard the story passed down, I think they certainly Steve played, sort of a B team or JV team tennis when he was not in season with hockey, and Dom did the same his first year, and then the coach told me couldn't keep playing JV tennis. That's the way I sort of got passed on. We could probably get Dom to tell that story, but he's a tennis nut, and he's gotten so good. I mean, we always talk about who is the best non-tennis playing tennis player, someone who has success in another area, whether it's an actor or another athlete. I mean, I would put Dom up there probably with anybody right now. I mean, I know Steve Nash plays a lot of tennis, but I don't think he's as good as Dom. Or Bodie Miller was a pretty good player. So Dom has to be one of the best of the, someone he grew up playing tennis, so it's actually not quite the same, but he's as a dual sport athlete. I mean, it's not John Lucas level, but he's pretty darn good.
I understand that he's played some of the age group ITFs now, right? Now that he's playing hockey.
Yeah.
How I know the Moore brothers is the Richmond Hill Country Club, Richmond Hill, right outside of Toronto. I've gone there for years and helped the tennis teaching. So Robert Steckley is a funny story. Steckley was a very talented young player from Canada. I was working with Steckley, and Dominic Moore didn't really play that much, especially in the wintertime, because he was so busy with hockey. And I just yelled, I said, Moore, get over here. And I told Moore, I said, if you quit hockey and I work with you for a month, you will beat this guy. And of course, Steckley at the time was the number one player in Canada in the 18s. But for our listeners, all three brothers were drafted in the NHL. All three brothers went to Harvard. And Harry Neal, who was a great player, then he became a great commentator on TV, said if there's a Hall of Fame for the Moore brothers, if there's a Hall of Fame for the Moore parents, I'll get this right, third time's a charm. If there's a Hall of Fame for tennis parents, the Moores are in. With Richard told me that the reason that they were so good is that their mom had some health problems where she even had a limp, and she would, every day, with her limp, going up the flight of stairs, going into the gym, and but he speaks so highly of the Moore brothers. Now Dominic was so talented, but he was playing way up in an age group. Richard and I went to watch one time, and so he might have been like 15 and playing, or 14 playing with 18-year-olds or whatever, but he was a healthy scratch. I did with Dominic, his first wife, Katie, who played soccer at Harvard. You probably know that story as well, but he was traded many times, and it was kind of fun where whatever city that he was traded to, I would be asked if I knew someone who taught tennis in that city. And but anyway, the Moore brothers. Your tennis center is right next to the hockey rink, correct?
Yeah, you're right there. So you don't have to travel very far. I mean, it's an interesting combination. I mean, certainly the movement in hockey, and getting a wide base and being a good mover. I mean, it's got to be one of the best sports for sort of off-court training. I would just cross-training would think hockey would got to be absolutely near the top. Yeah.
Oh, there's so many stories with. I guess you could just go with Bjorn Borg for one, but you're challenged with your feet, you're challenged with your hands, and again, there's three types of sports. There's non-contact, contact, and collision. Your reward for getting in the corner first and getting the puck is the car accident. I mean, you're just going to be hit right against the boards. And they use that facility for the camp. Plus, they have the World Team Tennis there still. Or no?
No, the World Team Tennis has sort of moved off. It's actually not in New England right now, but that's past. I mean, it's the hockey rink is really now just focused on hockey. But yeah, those are some good stories. And the Moore brothers, Harvard owes the Moore parents a lot. He's so good.
Well, do me a favor. Good. Ask Dominic Moore who's better tennis player, Dominic or Timo Solani. I guess Timo Solani from Finland is a very good player.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Let's go with starting as an assistant, working for Dave Fish. What a great guy, and your progression. You've been there now so many years. You're going towards 5-0 pretty soon, right?
Yeah, I just passed the 5-0 mile marker. It's in the rearview mirror now.
Oh, really? Young looking guy.
Yeah.
With being an assistant coach, how many years did you do that, and what was that like? And now being the head coach.
I mean, it was probably about 11 years with Dave as an assistant. And, it's obviously special to work at the school that you played at and to work for your former coach. And I think that gave us a leg up because I knew what the student experience was like from, being in their shoes before. And Dave and I were a good partner. Dave really helped me, temper my enthusiasm and put it in the right directions and help, mentor me in terms of coaching and what that's like. I mean, you have to put in the time. You have to do your apprenticeship. And I think what I quickly learned was just being a good player, as you all know, it doesn't mean you're a good coach. And I think I really felt like I spent that first, 5 to 10 years really learning the game.
Excuse me. There's always a joke, how to get to Carnegie Hall, practice. How do you get to Harvard?
Yeah.
Study. I actually stayed with Dave and his wife Bonnie, and they went to their camp at like 4:30 in the morning. So they said, well, you take this car and you can come in at 7:30. And I had to stop at a toll gate, and I asked the gentleman, how do you get to Harvard from here? He said, that's easy, just study.
Oh, nice.
But I read where you, I think a compliment to your students, as a student athlete, the Navy SEALs of college tennis. That's because they're challenged. They're not taking too many gut courses at too many light classes, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're not. They're certainly not. I think probably any comparison to the Navy SEALs isn't fair. I mean, they're not in going through that comment, but in the sense that they're challenged on a couple of fronts. I think that we've seen people come in from the outside that have been here, just been just so impressed with the level of workload and what they have to manage here, and that's one of the things that makes them so capable and so successful when they graduate. But they have to work hard and they have to manage their time, and they leave really confident in their ability to navigate challenges. And I think instead of taking things off their plate, Harvard puts them on their plate for them to learn to grow and to handle it. And so, the students are just phenomenal and just really, I mean, they changed so much during 4 years. I think all college coaches would say that. I mean, the growth from your first year to your senior year is a lot, especially for the guys. I think it's a lot of growth and maturity and social awareness and all those things that happen in those 4 years. And some of the really quiet kids come in and have to learn to be leaders and more vocal, and they leave as seniors. And, as a coach, it just, gives you a thrill. And then maybe some of your louder mouth kids, learn to tone it down and be more respectful and listen. And, they're all learning lessons. They're all teaching each other. And we're sort of in that laboratory. And it's just, that's what drew me to college tennis. That's why, I spent that, in these East now, it's, I don't know, 16, 17 years doing this and loving it. So, that was the draw.
Matt Gobble, who's his PhD professor at WashU, what he's told some of my students over the years is, say, for example, if they want to go to medical school, that they should really take the year after college and just really prepare for the MCATs and such. There are some light majors out there. So when I meet a kid and they tell me they're playing college tennis and they're becoming an engineer, for example, it's like, whoa. Yep. I don't want to belittle someone who's, in a communications major, but I know you downplayed it, but the Navy SEALs, I tell kids, here, step off the sidewalk for a minute. And I said, no, you're like a Navy SEAL. You're just standing on lunch. All you got to do is dig down and eat the worms and the enzymes. You'll be fine. You won't die. But it is very, very difficult to be a student athlete. I don't know if young junior tennis players realize that. You're with your players 20 hours a week. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean that's the NCAA sort of limits, but that's also not including matches. The match times are factored in a little differently. You're spending more than 20 hours a week with you're especially during the season. Just by they only count a match as 3 hours, and you're there all day. So you're spending more than 20 hours in a week in terms of your time with them. But in terms of practice season, yeah, that's your cap there. But you get to know them pretty well.
Well, one thing in the Ivies, you can't take a gap year, correct? I mean, you can't be on campus for a semester and not be on the team.
Right. You could conceivably take a gap year after high school before college, but you can't take a gap year once you get accepted and then take a year off, or a redshirt a year and come to campus and just train. Right. So that's a difference of the Ivies. There's not the top talent. I don't see a lot taking a redshirt. It's usually for a more developmental case where someone's sort of growing and needs a little extra time, or might be really young for their age. And we do see some kids taking a gap year to offset that.
Being young for the age. I think of Konstantin from Düsseldorf. How do you pronounce his last name? Soski?
Yeah, Zaska. Yeah.
Zaska?
Yeah.
I did a camp with him one summer, and what a great kid. But, they're asking about college tennis, and at that time, he was almost finished with high school, and I think he was just 15.
Yeah.
And that made it quite difficult. So when he was on your campus, he was very young, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of the rules, and there's now some changes, but yes, at the time that gap year you would be penalized for, which, the rule was originally intended so that, you're the 23-year-old European that had been playing futures for 5 years, couldn't start college as a first year or something. You want to level the playing field. And of course, there were some exceptions that we saw quite a bit, where the people had skipped a grade in third grade or something and didn't know. The parents were obviously not aware at the time that then, when you graduate high school, your clock starts. And even if you're very young for the age, Konstantin might have been 16, or something, or, when he started Harvard, or barely 17. And so he was young. So that's something that, that would be a perfect case for a gap year.
Here's one thing I want to say that leads into a question, and help me with the pronunciation. Henry von Schulenburg. How do you say that?
Henry von der Schulenburg, yes.
David Squire sent him to me when I think he was 8 years old, and he said he'll be able to do 80 double jumps and will beat everybody at your place in mini tennis. It was 100% correct. But then I worked with him. That time he came to Florida, then I was in Zurich. And again, I didn't coach him, just an elevator ride. But Squire has a son, Henry. I think the parents should hear that, is what he did with his son, Henry Squire, is he started inviting Henry von Schulenburg to the lessons.
Von Schulenburg.
And my point with that is, for parents, I think it's so important to have friends. And this is my question, 100%, it's pretty close to 100% of the people I've worked with played college tennis. They look back and they say it was the greatest time in their life. And I think one of the reasons is their teammates become friends. And I think in junior tennis, a lot of times, there's just a craziness about competition, and they don't have that sense of enjoyment to have a teammate. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's no question that tennis can be a lonely sport. I do think it's how your coach frames it. I do think that if you have a camp or a group that you travel with, you can sort of mitigate those, that sort of loneliness or isolation. Or, junior tennis it can be kind of a competitive space, and it's, it feels like a zero-sum game. If you get better, then, you take a spot for me in a college or whatever. I still think that, college is just none of that's there. You've got 12 of your closest friends on the team, and you're in it together, and there's that camaraderie. We've talked about it. That's what drew me to to working, in college tennis. And it's electric. It's fun. Matches are like little mini Davis Cup matches, and there's an intensity and an energy that's, really dynamic, and it's a big draw. So I certainly think that I could see why people would feel that way, and it is a unique stop in your tennis development is the time as college tennis players. So people savor it, and then when it's over, it's just what they wouldn't give to be on a team like that. Now Europe has like club leagues and things like that where you get a feel for that too. It's just that once you're out here, we don't quite have that. People play on their league teams. Those give you some of those sorts of feelings, but it's not a big club league system like they have in Europe.
With the progression to the, you said they come in as a freshman. There's so much change. I think in the high school years, people change so much physically, but they definitely grow up. How about leadership and captains? How do you work that? I mean, I've heard many times that coaches can pick their captains, but they can't pick their leaders.
Well, actually, Harvard, the coaches can't pick their captains. It's a vote by the team, and coaches don't vote. Okay. Which is, I don't know, it's always been a feature of Harvard. I never actually questioned it until I heard that other programs did it differently. Sometimes the coaches can vote, and some programs the coaches picks the captain. Leadership is something you want to start right off the bat. I think that if everyone has a stake, if they take ownership in their development and in the team, they're already showing signs of leadership. This is the concept of the renters versus an owner. What is that? Nobody washes a rental car, goes to the car wash in a rental car because, they don't care how it looks. And if you take ownership in something, that's the beginning of people becoming, someone that's really takes care of their own stuff first and learns to manage themselves, and then, can help manage and support the rest of the team. And so there's a progression there. You certainly want, the students taking the wheel of the team and getting a chance to, put their imprint on it. And so you want to encourage that. I think as coaches, you have to give them the space to be able to say, okay, what do you guys, how far do you want to go? Where do you want to take this and put the ball in their court, for them to, see how far you want to go. And that's, leadership will, it's little mini conversations. It's peer-to-peer, sort of practice in that, where you get, pair the upperclassmen with some of the incoming kids, and that's, leadership. And you want to provide lots of opportunities for people to practice that. So by the time they're seniors, they're more comfortable in that role. So, you've got to find lots of little micro opportunities for them to do that. And I think good teams, there's that sort of process in place so that they can, leave with that sort of experience, because that's a great takeaway from college tennis.
Two Harvard guys, Garrett Doran and Christo Schultz, they both told me that once you're in, they take care of you at Harvard, meaning that, or I guess my question, obviously, tutorials and, support systems. Obviously, you look at Harvard, I would just think you look to your left and you look to your right, and you're dealing with you're surrounded by smart people. What type of support system is someone struggling a little bit academically?
Well, I think this has been the biggest change in not just Harvard, but all schools across the country now. There's just more touch points. There's more support staff. There's more academic resources available. And if you're struggling on other fronts, whether it's mental health or some of your other areas, schools are just much more approachable, and they've really wised up in how to meet the students in what they need today. So we have a whole academic resource center that's free, and you can get peer-to-peer tutoring. You can get mentoring or help in the writing center, and most of the time the issue is just making somebody aware of where the help is, and how to get started with that. Or as a student, if they're struggling, that admitting that they're behind and they need some help. But yeah, the resources are endless. Our team does very well academically. We had some absurd GPA last year. Was a team, last spring semester, our team GPA was over a 3.8, which is crazy at Harvard. It's one of the best GPAs of any team, and at Harvard, and so they've done really well. So certainly they are finding ways to manage and thrive here. Even it is a challenge, but I would say after the first year or two, as you do the dry run and you learn how to manage your time and figure out what you need to do and how you need to position yourself and your study habits, they hit the ground running and do great.
I remember on a yearly basis, my late mother would come and visit. I was on a college campus. I was a department head. I was training tennis teachers. And I remember her saying, I'm the youngest of six, Stevie, before you leave here, you have to think twice. Being around young people, being around learning, that university life. I think that fits you. Could you expand upon that?
Well, in the sense that it's a laboratory, it's a place for learners, it's contagious. Yeah, certainly. I got to know a bunch of the faculty here at Harvard and connecting with them. I think it's a place of learning, and I think it's addictive. I love being a part of that. I love growing in that way as a coach, or even the context with other coaches. We just came from a staff meeting, with the head coaches meeting, and just hearing the other coaches think through, their programs and what they're doing is just great fun, right? Talking cross sports about what we share in common as coaches. And then, watching students learn there. It keeps you young. There's no question that there's a lot of, you get a lot of tailwind here because there's the energy of the young students and their passion to get good at something. This is not like a spectator school where people just run to their dorm room and play video games. And people have real passions and drive. And to see that all around you, that's what I think the calling card of Harvard. I was a student there when Matt Damon was on campus acting in the student plays. And, I was playing tennis while one of my closest friends was a jazz musician. I'm a kid from Cleveland. I didn't know anything about jazz. And I would go to his concerts and he would come to my tennis matches. And, now he's traveled the world playing with, Wynton Marsalis, Josh Redman. He's a famous jazz pianist. And, I was surrounded by people that, had talent, but worked really hard and were willing to do that. We had a documentary filmmaker with us and, all these different things. And so you're surrounded by people that want to, get really good at their craft. And yeah, that makes for great conversations in the dining halls and all over campus, frankly. So that was really, what drew me to Harvard and what still does.
Reminds me of a young guy named Araneo. He used to come to our free clinic on Saturday mornings. And his goal, he wanted to be the best flute player in the world. He used to play 8 hours a day. I know he ended up at Harvard. A question I have, years ago, especially the girls, not so much the boys, the junior year, the Ivy Leaguers, they take a year abroad. My question is that's gone away, or perhaps that hasn't totally gone away. But it seemed like years ago, kids would be taking that internship on Wall Street and what have you. But are your players doing that, some of that, or are they all playing in the summer?
Well, it sort of depends on where they are on the team and what their goals are, right? There's certainly, you want to get better. The pathway is pretty clear. You need to, really leverage the summer to play a lot. And I think the kids that get good and, move up the lineup do. I also think that, there's time in the summer where you can do short internships or you do something for a couple of weeks or, you get a chance to dip your toe in the waters here. That as you're getting older and you're getting up there and you also want to think about your career and you're not going to play pro tennis, you have to be realistic about, finding some experience. So, it's a juggling act for sure. And there's ways to do that where you can put something on your resume and still push your tennis forward. But, you want to be one of the best in the country. You got to be spending the time on court to make that happen.
Do you have your history there so long now. Have you had many transfer students?
We've had two students come in as a transfer, but that's in 20 years probably. So we can take transfers, but it's been rare. Yeah, so it's not a big part of our team.
I've been in the business of helping people try to be a college tennis player. I always say, a lot of students go and they flunk out, and it's sometimes easier to get into school as a sophomore. There was a young man I worked with who he was not a tennis player. He just was with me to learn how to teach tennis, which is very unusual that a high school student wanted to learn to teach tennis. And he wanted to get into Cornell Engineering School. And I remember telling him he didn't quite get in. He was a really good student. I said, live at home, go to Rutgers, get a 4.0. And they're going to drink a lot of beer at Cornell. And sure enough, a year later, he got in. Along those lines, I have to throw this out for my son, Connor. We were at Harvard helping Dave and Bonnie with their summer camp staff. And I don't know the name of the building, but it's indoors and there's a track and there's a pole vault pit.
Right.
It's right there by the tennis courts. And so Connor was helping me with some demos, and he flew to Boston with me. Then he was going to go to Europe, so he was 17 or 18. And I'll never forget, during part of my lecture, I said, you just have to help me with demos. I'll call you over. So he took a nap at the pole vault pit. But I did tell him, I said, we'll never we will never got into this place, but we'll be able to tell people we taught at Harvard. But anyway, long story short is that he transferred from Florida State to Ohio State. This is for the listeners. He had a pretty high GPA, and I remember the Cornell coach calling me, and his GPA was high enough to transfer. I think it is much more difficult to get into a school straight out of high school if you were to, I like this scenario. You can't do it in Ivy League. If they take a semester off, and then they go to school, and they're on campus where they get used to the rigors of the new academic load, and they don't have the pressure of making the lineup. But you got to hit the ground running if you're a freshman at Harvard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the normal path, but yeah, there's different ways to do it. Certainly, there are different pathways there, and it depends on your individual circumstances.
How about in the fall when you guys play? You must run into some players from Williams or Middlebury or Tufts in some of the fall tournaments. Are the top D3 guys, are they competitive with the bottom of your lineup, or is there a big difference? Is it just case-by-case study?
The Division III space is, we've seen it exploding. The level has gone up and up and up. And I'm really impressed with that option for students. I think it's just, the level has only gotten higher. I guess we're right next to Tufts, and they got to the Final Four this past year, and their team. You look at their UTR. You can do the sort of that power UTR rating of the team, and it's not that different than BU's team or BC's team. So there's definitely a big rise in that D3 level. I think it's impressive, and I think it's competitive. So that's been a change probably in the past 10 years. I think it's really accelerated.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I worked with so many kids. It's like if they can't play D1, they don't want to play. And I go, what are you talking about? Don't you love tennis? Eric Buterak's name came up on one of our podcasts, and I said, well, we'd love to have Eric on, but let's go a step further and talk to Bud. So Bud Schultz is scheduled to be on. But yeah.
That's great.
But I know, and he's a Boston guy. You must know him well. But with D3, I'm just so glad you said that, because I just hear D1, and 4 years of college tennis goes pretty quick, and it's a sport for a lifetime. Braden used to say, if you're 15 years old, you got 75 years to work on the 90 and over division. And
right.
I think that's a little.
Well, even that. It's just you can win a national champion. They got to the Final Four. Like, I don't care what division you're in. That's good level, and it's competitive, and you're on a great team, and it's a great experience. And I think people do discount it. I think you're right, and they think, this is the only level. But Bud Schultz and Eric Buterak are probably the two of the best D3 players of all time. Both doing well on the pro circuit. those are great stories. And, people think, oh, well, this and that. And I just think, you can interview Eric too, but I mean, being a, leader on a team, versus riding a bench on a really strong D1 team. I mean, those are very different college experiences, and people shouldn't, people should take that seriously, because, there's a little confidence you get by playing on the top of the lineup and being a, leader of a program, that carries with you for life. So I wouldn't discount it.
No, again, appreciate saying that. Like Braden used to say, go where you're wanted. And
Right.
I think also too, that's where your fall tournaments or the summer is that, you don't quite make the grade to play D1 at age 18. Again, for the listeners, Bud Schultz got to be 39 in the world, and he played limited tennis growing up, but never played a junior tournament. Amazing story.
Yeah, he played basketball in college as well. I mean, yeah, it is unbelievable. And I just think, it's not, they should just go and see for themselves the level, because it's strong.
Let's do this. Just general advice, and then I know you're well read in books. I know you have a long list, but maybe just give a couple books. Before books, so what general advice? I mean,
well, actually, I'll put it together, but I recommend one book, and all of our incoming students, have to read it, and it's called The Art of Learning, and it's by Josh Waitzkin. And long story short, but Josh was the sort of the model, or for the not documentary, I guess the movie, Searching for Bobby Fischer. You remember that?
Great movie. Yeah, I recommend people watch it.
So Josh basically became the number one best international chess player under 21 in the world, and for various reasons, dad and the movie and fame, and he sort of kind of moved away from chess, and then started getting into a martial arts, and then became world champion in that. He's sort of a master learner. There are a lot of very good takeaways. I think it works in any sport. So first book I always recommend reading. If you want to get into coaching, or you want to be a good student, or you want to get better at whatever you're doing, read The Art of Learning. I think more than any book, it's done a wonderful job of breaking down the learning process of what it means to learn a craft, and the different components of that. Because he's been successful in a couple sports, he draws some great anecdotes that you can use, and sort of that progression, and he sort of maps it out there beautifully. I just think it's a great book for anyone who wants to get mastery over a skill. And I
say the author's name again. Art of Learning.
The Art of Learning is the title of the book, and the author is Josh Waitzkin. Okay. And this again, it was the kid from Searching for Bobby Fischer, which for your younger listeners, they won't have seen it, but that's also maybe a movie recommendation. It's great for tennis parents too. All tennis parents should see that too.
In his academic setting years ago for trained tennis teachers, we would recommend movies to watch on or sign a movie and have a discussion. Here's another Harvard guy. How about Timothy Galloway, Inner Tennis, best-selling book of all time? What do you think of that book?
Great call. We have another part of the Harvard tennis family, and that book is great. I mean, it really started that whole mental game approach. I mean, Dr. Learn, all the people that came after him, everyone owes a debt of gratitude towards Tim Galloway in that book. And it just sort of, helps open your eyes to that other battle going on inside the match, which is, between the ears, and how you develop a good strategy between the points, and how you navigate your coaching voice, and, how you track yourself through tennis. I think it's a great starting place for anybody, wanting to explore that. Cause I think, it gives a good framework.
I should be able to tell you the coach's name, Brian. He was in the NFL for some time, and I can't remember. Maybe it was because the players make a little bit of money. Maybe it was $1,000, but at any time during the summer training camp, preseason, if they weren't carrying Galloway's book, they'd be fined $1,000. They had to have the book everywhere they went. And he would, say, open it up to page such and such, and the doer and the teller, and, the teller's ego, and the ego's got to shut up, and, comes back to the Bill Belichick, just that one sign, just do your job. How about a couple other books, maybe one or two?
I mean,
give us 100.
No, I mean, those would be the ones, I mean, that I think for tennis players and in sports that I would definitely point to. There's everybody, I think it's very good to read autobiographies or biographies of former players and if you're interested in tennis and you're a young person, read biographies and autobiographies. I think it's very motivating. I read a bunch as a kid, and that was really, even sports biographies. I mean, they're just a great way for someone to digest, how people got successful and hearing about their life stories and how they started out just like they were as kids. And I think that's great. I mean, just love reading about whether it's stories of Arthur Ashe or, other tennis players or other great athletes. I think it's, that should be a must on the bedside table.
Just this morning, lots of rain yesterday. So I sent these players a text and I just said, practice was moved from 6:45 to 9:45. And I just said school, sleep, gym, because we have some gyms they can use. And what I did is I have just started the biography on Federer called Master. Just a tidbit, I never knew until this morning that Lynette Federer had a one-handed backhand. All those little things add up. Maybe that helped Roger. Who knows? There's lots of things that helped Roger. But Andrew, what about general advice? Again, I'd say a lot of people listening to our podcast, parents driving to practice with kids wants to be college bound. I sometimes just say, what's advice for the player, the parent, and the coach? If you were just to sum that up with a few key points.
I mean, you just got to keep your eye on the ball and keep your nose in the books. I mean, it is about getting better, and investing in that process. Brick by brick, you sort of build it up and you stack one good day on top of another. You have to have a vision. You have to have a plan you want to develop with your coaches for your future and what that could look like. You want to have some benchmarks and you want to have sort of a pathway, but you also have to be willing to, find a coach you trust and then let them help lead the way because they'll have had experience in this. I think it is really hard for parents that didn't grow up in tennis I think it's hard for parents, even if they did play tennis, how to do this process and trust it. But if the students and the young people can make it their own journey and you're just sort of supporting that, that's the ideal situation. If you feel like you're dragging your kid to a practice, that's usually a sign that they might want some time off or it's not quite theirs yet. I think those are some touch points there. But, obviously the real work is hopefully finding a great mentor and coach who's can clearly articulate what they need to improve on and be a good mentor with a good disposition. So I think that's where probably a lot of the parenting work should go into.
That's one of the words from my mother, disposition. I needed to improve my disposition. I'm going to write this down. I do give credit where credit's due, but your eyes on the ball and your nose in the book. That's good. I've working, year in and year out with so many kids that are smarter than I am, which is not difficult. But I guess SAT scores, and I've got one kid. I go, you're getting a 1600, and I think just because there's aptitude, sometimes there's so much repetition, it becomes redundant. You're just in meetings and going over the same things, same principles. And these highly intelligent kids, their emotional quotient. I do the old Welby Van Horn thing when I take the racket out of their hand and go, right now you're a smart kid. Put the racket back in there and go, right now you're not so smart. But with that, to get excited about your teammates, to get excited about helping the person next to you, tennis is a sport where you become a little bit self-centered. It's the junior song for us is I have the kids just go I me. I say no, sing it fast. I me. But with that, so we have a young player today who's teaching a charting class, and it's a video of him playing as well. But it just seems to me that nowadays, because the kids are just inundated with all these videos and all these clips they can look at, that's a little bit more difficult. When I was a kid, it was exciting to see yourself on video. Now it's like no big deal. Everybody's got a video in their pocket, a video camera because of their phone.
But there's some opportunities there too. And I think that, learning by watching, whether it's somebody else or yourself, is just, it's a, great opportunity, and hopefully, you can mimic it a little bit. And, I think, I remember watching matches and trying to go out there and do it myself, the next day, or doing it against the backboard, imagining playing somebody or playing in certain styles. I think those are great opportunities for people. I think, that's, as you've done that for years in your program.
I've got one last thought, I think parents especially, but players as well, have a very successful college program, and a recruit comes on campus and the recruit's really good, and the players want that recruit to come. And if you think about it, it's like, well, maybe I'm sixth in the lineup, and we're only graduating one senior, and they bring in these two recruits. I might be a senior, not make the lineup. But I think that's something that the junior tennis players should realize, is that it's so competitive that even when kids are, struggling to be on the college tennis team, a recruit comes on campus and they're really successful programs, you're inviting people to come in who could take your spot. Could you comment on that a little bit? Well,
I think that, you have to learn to be selfless. You have to want your team to be strong. And I think, you're right. You're exactly right about that. And that's what being on a team is like. And you want the best players around you. The Golden State Warriors wanted KD on their team, at the time, and that made everybody better. Basketball's a little different because you can get more people in, you're right, playing time. Though, those practices become really good, and it can raise everybody's level, I think, in the end. But you're right. If someone was a senior, bring a kid on who then, made it difficult for them to get the lineup. Talk about selflessness or team focused, team oriented. That's impressive.
Andrew, I could ask you questions all day long, but here's my last one. So you spent a significant part of your youth in Cleveland, and now so many years in Boston.
Yep.
Are you a Cleveland sports fan or a Boston sports fan?
Okay, great question here. And I've been in Boston now, if you add them all up, the years I was here at Harvard too as an undergrad. It's been almost 30 years. So at this point, it's really hard not to be in this environment, especially coming from Cleveland, which was like unfortunately, a little bit of a wasteland in terms of success. And then to come to Boston and then watch, the Patriots win, and then watch the Red Sox win, and then watch the Bruins win, and then watch the Celtics win. So, I'd never seen a championship in Cleveland until LeBron did it, and had suffered through some of those really just devastating losses, whether it's, Jordan over Elo and the shot to take out the Cavs, or I love those Cavs teams, or the Browns, losing twice to the Broncos, or whatever, Brian Sipe throwing the interception against the Raiders. So I think Cleveland sports history is definitely with a bunch of tough losses, and that always sticks with me. I still have a Browns jersey in my, here, but I never got connected with the Celtics, so I still root for the Cavs, and I now watch both Patriots and the Browns some, and probably it's hard not to be a Pats fan in New England, and now we're getting a little bit of humble pie, which is probably much deserved.
I grew up not so far away from Syracuse, and was always intrigued by Brown, Jimmy Brown, or no, what was the name of the great running back?
Jim Brown.
Jim Brown, not Jimmy Brown. Might hit me.
Well, and also Paul Brown, who was the coach of the team, back in the day.
Brown.
We've had a great history, and I Cleveland's special, and you grow up there. It's hard to. I can't watch all the games because you don't always have the games here on TV. But I would say I'm more a New England fan, but I still, anytime I can, try to tune in and watch the teams.
I'd love to see the Browns win. Just like, come on, guys, let's let Cleveland win again. They did win way back when, but the one time
won a lot, right? Yeah. And then Art Modell fired Paul Brown. That was his first coaching move. So that was, but before it was the NFL championship, it was Paul Brown and them winning. That was really our star team.
Well, I've only been fortunate enough to be in Cleveland once, and when I was there, people were taking down their frame photos of LeBron because he had left Cleveland. A lot of the kids were really upset that he had left.
Right. He came back and rescued us and brought us a title. So I'm a big LeBron fan and very grateful for him for doing that for our city. So that was a great moment.
But Cleveland and Boston, yes, it's so much success in Boston. Bobby Orr, Larry Bird. I love to watch. I don't really watch basketball, but I watch Larry Bird clips. I think all the junior tennis players should watch Larry Bird clips. It seemed like he was the slowest and couldn't jump, but he was just so amazing.
Yeah. That was before I got to Boston, so I actually was not at that time, the Boston fan. But, the great sporting history.
Yeah. But no, you've made so many valuable points. We'd like to think that, everything we're doing with free tennis education is people have a tennis treasure chest and they can add golden nuggets. But thank you so much. Why don't you give us a closing comment? We'll say goodbye, but really appreciate you being on.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm so glad to be a part of the conversation and all that you do for, tennis, junior tennis, about tennis development, taking the lessons from Vic Braden and all the other mentors that you've had. I'm trying to do the same with my mentors and sort of pass it on to the next generation. Certainly science-based learning. We have to, you have to study the geometry of the court and understand some of the physics here of stroke production. Those are things that, certainly now with video and things, instead of, having everyone can have access to it now. So there's not as many excuses for not having good technique. And you've been a pioneer in that and pushing that. And I think that, I think that's certainly that base of the pyramid in getting people started and on a good foundation is just everything. And so, I'm happy to be part of the podcast. And another time we'll talk some volleys. We'll talk about
just
volley technique.
Let's do that. I mean, you probably be too long. I mean, you want to just touch upon it for a second, or let's have another podcast. Your choice.
Well, I mean, I would just, certainly the volleys there is a resurgence in the sense I think everyone is seeing it, certainly on the pro level, even in college, how important the ability to volley is, not only for your doubles point, but how many opportunities there are now to come forward and finish at the net, whether it's an occasional serve and volley, whether it's an approach and volley. It's a separator. We see how good, I think Federer obviously had it even as a young player, but how Nadal and Djokovic developed just fantastic volleys. And they did not come with that on tour. And how now, if they're playing somebody standing back at the fence to return, they're serving and volleying. They'll do whatever needed, and they have the toolkit to be able to do that. And I think, some of us old serve volleyers do feel like it's like a lost art, a little bit like a knuckleball pitcher. But certainly some of the challenges I think about good volleying today is certainly, these small grips. Back in our day, Steve, I played with a 4 5/8 grip as a teenager. And I mean, my dad played with a 5 grip. I mean, you don't even make a racket with a 5 grip anymore. And that, the physics of a grip, but the fatter the grip, the more stable the racket head is, the harder it is to manipulate it. Of course, now players like Nadal play with a quarter grip, which allows the racket head to be moved and flexed, and you can use your wrist and really put extra sauce on the ball, which is really fun with people with these strings. But there's an ability to do different things that we don't have. You didn't have that option with the 5/8 grip, and I do recognize, that even Nadal keeps his wrist pretty still through contact. But the concept is that players come to the net with the history they've learned from the baseline, which is, tends to be a lot of wrist flexion or release of the wrist, and at the net you want that stability of the wrist, and that's something that if you played with a 5/8 grip and an old wood racket, you sort of continental grips, it sort of comes with the program, and so you didn't have to do a lot of teaching of the volley because it was, the backhand volley was like a shorter slice and people learned it. Some of it just by the mechanics of the racket and the grips. And now, we're missing that. So how to teach the volleys is something that, I made a little crusade of mine, certainly on our team. And that wrist stability is something that, a lot of people don't have these days, or haven't experienced, or even it's often it's an uncomfortable position for them. And so, that's something that, I'm cognizant of, and I think is, we're that the lost art of the volley there is some of the grips and the grip changes there have contributed to that. And I don't know, if you stuck somebody with a big 4 5/8 grip, I think they would be able to keep that racket head stable. It's just easier to do that because of the physics of the racket instead of the racket head being easier to manipulate.
No, it reminds me of a tidbit. Leonard Berglund years ago, coaching Borg, he made him go to a bigger grip so he could stabilize the racket head for volleying. The crusade we have is we'd like to have players, I should say, coaches have players play one-bounce doubles 10, 15 minutes a day. In other words, when we also do it where the no poaching on the return and everybody has to come to the net. Another shout out to Dave Fish, a lifelong learner. I think long before Craig O'Shaughnessy was really known within the tennis industry, I remember Dave telling me about what O'Shaughnessy was doing with taking information from Warren Pretorius, the analytics, and then writing stories. And I think also, too, the geometry of the court and the stats, let alone the mechanics. Even like, say, go back to Carlos Goffi, we had so many people share this points to reinforce, the volley is a green light point. Your head 40 love, the young 12 and under kid, why don't you hit a body serve that'll come back straight and play a volley? But kids will go 5 years. It's really sad now. They'll play one up, one back doubles, and they'll play singles 5 years at tournament tennis, and they haven't gone to the net.
And then they get to college, and you're like, okay, now we have to make up for lost time. And now if you want to play doubles, you have to learn how to volley. So, I think also the decline of the wall has hurt because we used to just volley against the wall a lot. And you develop wrist strength, and you don't have enough time to take a swing. You have to keep it really simple and compact, just because of the nature of the ball comes back so quickly from the wall. So all of those are factors.
Oh yeah.
That's hopefully that are it's just there's nothing like it. Of course I'm biased, but there's nothing like seeing a good struck volley and what that does, and even think about. How much easier it is to finish a point with the volley right on top of the net than it is to try to, thread the needle from the baseline on a winner. And so, there's a real advantage from that positioning. And like you always talk about in terms of your angles and what's possible. I think that's, something I like to pass along. I like to think that our players learn and leave much better volleyers than they started.
Oh, that's great. No, we'll have to have you on for round 2 and let's just talk volleys. That would be a great podcast.
Yeah. Great.
But Andrew, this has been a lot of fun. I know a lot of people will appreciate getting to know you better and all the nuggets, all the advice that you've shared.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate it. Happy holidays to you and the rest of the family down there. And we'll stay in touch.
All right. All the best, Andrew. Thanks again.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, listeners, podcast, I think 125. Andrew Rueb, great guy. That was fun. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I know some people are putting this up to 1.25 on their gadgets to listen to it a little bit faster, but there's just so much. And I do know that we have some people that have listened to every podcast, so we're going to put that quiz together. Anyway, that was great. So much, especially for the people that have an interest in college tennis. But Andrew Rueb, thank you very much. Listeners, thank you. Adios, amigos.